Hi, hello, and welcome everyone to our March call. Let me first start with the Microsoft Event Code of Conduct. As we mentioned on all the calls previously, we are a formally registered user group with Microsoft, so we do need to comply with the requirements. So if you feel that any of the behavior presented by anyone attending our meetings is disruptive, disrespectful, please reach out to either myself, Charlie, or Kat, or you can directly report that to Microsoft. Couple of the housekeeping points as again. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to use the chat feature or raise your hand. Is entirely up to you. Please also share your viewpoints. Please actively use the chat as we've been doing it so far. If you have anything else also to add from your experience and perspective, also use the chat for that. A couple of points. So first of all, the call is being recorded. If you don't wish your lovely face to be on the YouTube, please turn off the camera. But we do encourage for everyone to put the cameras on if possible. Also, do please also use the meeting reactions, either love or clapping, anyone you wish. One more point. We actively looking for the speakers. If you have anything you would like to share with us, either on user experience, user interface, or accessibility within Power Platform, not just Power Apps, please do submit your session. We currently reviewing them all. If there's anyone who is on the call today and submitting the session and we haven't contacted with you yet, we promise we will do it within the next couple of weeks. But yes, if you haven't submitted it and you have an idea, please scan the QR code, and Charlie, if you can also put it in the chat, the direct link, that would be great. And then without further ado, let's move to our great presentation for today. First, we will have Stuart presenting for us with his government's digital standards, if I remember it right. And then we'll move to Taylor, who will be presenting for us on accessibility. I'm sure Taylor will also introduce himself, but we have a few speakers before presenting on accessibility subject, but Taylor is the first one who is actually have a professional certification into the subject. So I'm super excited to hear from him. So without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and I will kindly ask for Taylor to take over. To Stuart to take over.
First and foremost, thank you everyone for joining. It's great to see so many familiar faces and a few new faces. And I am here today to talk to you about GDS the musical. Not Government Design Service, but we'll find out in a few moments what it is. There is a little bit of a joke in here as well. So a little bit about me. So I'm Stuart Baxter, as you probably guessed by now. I am a D365 and Power Platform Solution Architect at Capgemini. So I work with Charles and also work with Keith Atherton, who's on the call. I have been a Microsoft Biz Apps MVP for coming on 3 years now. Hopefully getting my third bisc in a few months' time. And I am the co-founder of Scottish Power Platform User Group. You may recognise the Rainbow Highland Cow. And last but not least, I'm very passionate about GDS. First and foremost, as this is a musical, we need to thank our production crew for the music here. So thank you to Charles, Kat, and of course Anna for having me along and for putting on these great sessions. And on with the show. So Government Design System, or Greatest Design Show, as I like to call it, provides a really user-friendly guideline on how to design applications and services. It has a whole host of components and so on that are specific to government, but it also has some generic guidelines around when you should use this over that, when you should do X as opposed to Y. And there have been thousands and thousands of hours of user research conducted. For anyone who's ever used any website that ends in .gov.uk, you have used GDS. I'm sure you'll agree they tend to be very user-friendly, and they all tend to be very familiar layouts. They do have some consistent principles there. And of course, with this being a musical, there has to be music. So bear with me a moment. Hopefully everyone can hear this in a second. As we go through, before we go into each act, I would like people in the chat to tell me what they hear.
No,
Still
still
nothing.
nothing.
That's
Still
enough.
nothing.
That's
Still no
enough.
sound.
We can muddle through without. It's a bit of fun, but it's not the main purpose of what we're doing today. So we'll move on to going through the different slides. So our first act here, you would have a moment ago heard Lionel Richie, hence the title, Hello, Is It Me You're Looking For? Anyone who's paying attention will notice that's not Lionel Richie, that's Adele. That is deliberate. In some cases, when users come to an app, they might have no idea why they're there. It's really, really important with that in mind to choose your app name wisely. And also when you welcome users to your app, tell them why they're there. Is this app for buying aeroplanes or is it for buying helicopters? They could both be called flight commercial, for example. No one knows unless you tell them why they're there. And this is really, really simple to implement. You can do this through your opening screen on a Canvas app, or you can do it through a custom page in your model-driven app. It does take a little bit of time. Model-driven apps don't natively have a welcome page. They used to a long time back, but they don't anymore. It's really worth doing though. When you start a conversation with someone, you would never go straight in a conversation. You always start with hello. You welcome them to that conversation. The same goes for your apps there. And here's a really great example of a welcome page. If you use Universal Credit and you've used it a million times, you might know what your Universal Credit account's for. If you haven't, you will have precisely no idea. So listing out what you might use this service for, possibly adding some related content on the right-hand side there, so useful links, links to documentation on how to use the app, for example, or links to the process the app forms part of. All these kind of things here can go on your welcome page. You will notice there is a sign-in link. Generally, with your Power Apps, you don't tend to sign in. It would be start using this service kind of thing. But I'm sure you'll get the gist of what the principle behind this is. So, open question for the group. Is anyone using welcome pages? And what impact have you seen by using them or not using them? I'm not sure if that silence is a good thing or a bad thing. Does it mean no one's using them?
I think we've got the mics turned off for most people.
Ah, I see.
Let me.
Pages.
I'm trying to see if I can get that turned on for people.
I can't remember how you did it. We used to have the same on Spark quite a lot as well.
Yeah, we're good to go.
Excellent. Cool. So anyone with any comments to add, do feel free to come off your mute.
I'll just say that I do use welcome screens with Canvas apps. One of the reasons is not just to tell people what app they're on, but also for performance reasons as well. Because if you're listing lots of records as your first screen, then of course it has to load those before it can load the app. But yeah, welcome screens are very good.
Things as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting comment from Samir there. Users are fed up with seeing the same welcome messages, especially if an app's been used regularly. Where I do see value is in the right-hand side linking to process guides and things you might download or similar apps or those sorts of things as well there. So I do agree to an extent welcome pages can get a bit boring, but I do see some value in them as well there.
You got to spice up your life there. Give people random facts from the internet.
I really like that, the start of that sentence. That brings us really nicely into the next slide when you say spice up your life.
Spice of the world, spice up your life, every boy and every girl, spice up your life.
Did you see the
And here we have
presentation
Spice
before,
Girls.
Kat?
No, I didn't, but works out
I promise
nicely.
this was not rehearsed. Me and Kat haven't spoken about this before.
Yeah, what are the odds? Exactly.
Yeah. So, on to Act 2. Tell me what you want, what you really, really want. If you're asking for something that's not common sense, tell the user what you mean. How many people on the call know where to find your personal tax ID? Hearing a lot of silence. I'm guessing not many.
Nope.
Are we talking US or UK?
This one is a UK one. I appreciate that's a bit of a small screenshot and it's not coming through great on my side, but hopefully everyone else can see it. Your personal tax ID can be found in the top right of any letter from HMRC. Now can you tell me where to find your personal tax ID? Of course you can. It's on the top right of any letter from HMRC. Really, really simple example there. The people using the app might not know that it's on the top right of any letter from HMRC. Tell them. For all the space that takes up, 16-point text underneath your heading on your input field, here's where you might find this. I've also seen this with things like your NHS number. Your NHS number is a 9-digit number that starts with a 7. Tell them that. Put that in the hint text. It makes things much easier. It's not going to change anyone's life. Once they've used the service once, they'll know. But if they've never used it, they'll never know. And we do have apps out in production that are used kind of once a quarter, once a year, maybe even less often. And there's always new users as well. So do consider that hint text is your friend. From a Dataverse perspective, you can pop that in a description field. You could even use that as your tooltips on your model-driven apps by doing that as well. So not just for Canvas apps, use descriptions. And there's other ways as well. You can tell people what you want, what you really, really want. So you have accordions. So these are really great for things that are important that you might want to tell someone. It starts off with your more details. You click on it, it expands, it gives you that wee bit more information. We then have inset text. Inset text is always visible. I tend to put this at the top of a section if there's a bit of information I want them to know. And then last but not least, you have warning text. Warning text in government terms is things like, if you don't complete your tax return by May, you will get fined. You want that to stand right out and be really important. I'm hoping we don't have many services out there that are fining people, but if it is something that's that level of important, it might warrant a bit more than grey hint text or a more detailed section, for example. And on to the next part of the show. Radios. When presenting users with a short list of 1 to 3 entries, more often than not, people would lean towards a drop-down. Everyone thinks they love a drop-down until you try to use it with a screen reader, and then it doesn't work. Until you have to do 3 clicks and scrolling down to find the thing you need. They're a complete hassle, and they shouldn't be used if you only have a few options. When I say a few, enough to fit on the screen without lots of scrolling. The maximum I would use would maybe be 5. Otherwise, it becomes the same kind of hassle as a drop-down. You obviously can't search with your radios as well, so do consider your screen real estate when considering radios, but they are worth exploring over drop-downs when you've got 2 or 3 options. A few key points from GDS. We should never pre-select radio options. We should never assume we know what the user wants. This is likely to give 2 possible outcomes. They may either not realise they've missed a question and just submit with the default, or they might submit the wrong answer, having not realised there was a question there. And here we'll see a really simple example. With that drop-down, please select 1. I've no idea what the options are until I've clicked on it. I then might need to scroll down a little bit at what I'm moving about with the mouse. With my radio buttons, it's clear there are 3 options there. It's clear if I think the best song is neither of those three, that's one of those three I want as the answer. For things like yes, no, not applicable, drop-downs are not your friend. Radio buttons are your friend. And on to our next part here, when it all goes wrong. Modern forms and Canvas apps now have a really nice property that I don't see used very often, called validation state. Validation state allows you to do some really cool custom error handling logic and give you that red error message, give you visibility of the red bar, red borders. However you want your error handling to work, it could be all three. And that's something that I would really like to see more people using. It's really simple. You put an if formula in and you have it return either error as a string or none as a string. I have seen people experimenting with passing other values in and getting really complex logic. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, though. I would recommend blocking it all in the error part. So if this happens, or this happens, or this happens, or this happens, or this happens, return error, as opposed to returning other values. I have seen sporadic results. Sometimes passing something else in works. Sometimes you get unexpected behavior. So when it comes to error handling, certainly look into validation state on modern controls. It's something that can really elevate your error handling and your displaying of error messages. I'm sure everyone will agree looking at that screenshot there. It's very clear what the problem is. There's bright red text that tells you. It's very clear there is a problem. There's a big bright red bar and big bright red borders. Really, really simple thing, but something that should be considered. Everyone knows error handling is important. It's one thing to display an error, it's another thing to display a nice error. And going back to our model-driven apps, error handling is supported in model-driven apps for your mandatory fields and all those sorts of things. You can also extend these to give custom errors using business rules. I would recommend for things like maximum values, use a business rule to pop a custom error in. There are the out-of-the-box ones that says, please enter a number between 1 and 100. Personally, I'm not a massive fan. For the effort it takes to put that custom rule in, it's all low code, it's all drag and drop. It takes about 5 minutes, and it gives a really, really clear and meaningful error to the user. So not just for your Canvas apps, your model-driven apps as well, meaningful errors, please, folks. I'm almost at the end of our slot, and it's important when we finish up something to say goodbye. When we get to the end of a journey, tell users what they expect to happen next. If they've got a reference number that they need to quote when they discuss this, tell them. You can display it on screen within your app, or you can send them an email. Common practice is to do both on Canvas apps. It's a bit more challenging to display a confirmation on a model-driven app. It could be done by customizing your on-save event. It's not really low-code though, so do consider how you're going to tell people what happens next, if indeed anything. And that brings us to the end of the show with a really good example of a confirmation screen. Anyone who's followed any government design service will have seen this kind of pop up here. When you complete a journey, you get this. It tells you what you've just done. We'll just complete the presentation. Tells you your reference number to quote if you want to discuss it. And it tells you what happens next. And on to that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. I haven't been paying attention to the chat while presenting, so I'm just going to stop sharing and have a quick look at the chat. So just reading through the chat here, interesting point around not pre-selecting radio buttons. Perhaps changing which column type to go for in Dataverse. Yep, very good point there, Franco. I have seen as recently as this week someone using pre-selects, and we found 300 users who submitted them, and they were all the same answer because no one noticed it was there. It's hiding at the bottom of the form. And just to build on what Frank was saying as well, this can be implemented on Power Pages as well. GDS do have a publicly available JavaScript library that you can certainly implement into Power Pages. A nice wee comment from Andrew there as well. At this stage, you do usually get a notification from HMRC to tell them you owe money in tax. That may well come through a GDS-style email. So, unfortunate news, but great to see GDS out there in the world.
So, for
Any
those
other questions or
across
comments?
the pond who don't deal with GDS, what is GDS and how does it what does it encompass? Where I don't know.
That is a really good point, actually. Not everyone is fully familiar with what GDS covers. Just give me 2 seconds. I'm just going to bring up another screen. I'm conscious we do have... How much time have I got, Anna?
I think you've got like another 6 minutes.
6 minutes, yes.
Good. Yeah, won't take that long. So GDS covers quite a wide range of things, if I'm honest. I'm going to share this big screen here. So it starts off with a service standard. So this covers understanding your users and their needs, solving a problem, providing a joined-up experience. And there's lots and lots of guidelines here. You also have your GDS components, which look a bit like this. And these give you some inspiration for components that have had all sorts of research on them and include when you should use it, when you shouldn't use it, how it all works, what you might want to use instead. Things like the avoid placeholder text here. There's a section on radios, for example, that tells us somewhere. Yeah, this text will look familiar. It was on the slides 5 minutes ago. And there's a whole bunch of really useful things in here as well around patterns. So in patterns, for example, you've got check a service is suitable. That's a route of questioning. You've got confirmation page. That's the one we saw at the end of the session there. You've got all sorts of different patterns as well. Where I find this really useful is the kind of proof of concept stage. Being able to go in and say, right, okay, you want a box that looks like... So what I'm hearing is you want a text input box. It looks like something like this. And they go, no, it's not a multi-line text, it's a single line text. Okay, so it looks like this then. They go, oh yeah, but it's like some text underneath to show why they would enter that, what that is. Oh, that's going to be hint text, which will be down here somewhere. Let's scroll down here, even further down, something like that. Yeah, that's exactly what I want. Hint text to tell me why I might use it. It's a really great resource. There's all sorts of stuff on there, from inspiration on how you might design stuff to concepts around why you should design things in the way that you do. A whole bunch of reading. You could spend hours and hours and hours on there. I do recommend, if you have some free time, have a look. But it is something that can become a labour of love, and you end up spending months and doing things to the nth degree on there. But yeah, that's GDS.
Now, is that a actual law or requirement for users or designers in the UK? Because I'm guessing this is just UK.
It was designed for the UK, but it can be used by anyone, which I think is really interesting. The government has made it open source. All government services need to use it if they're public facing, but there's nothing enshrined in law that says public services need to use it, for example. So anything that ends in .gov.uk should be, but there's things like the Ministry of Defence, for example, use a flavour of this. the NHS use a flavour of this and adopt some of it, but not all of it. So it's widely used, but there's nothing mandating it in law.
So like from my perspective, it's like CAT is like a framework, first of all, for delivering the project for the central government. That's my kind of experience, that they need to follow more of a user-centered design approach. And secondly, there's also that like a components library and how the things should look like. So there is a consistency across all the Gov websites. And again, having worked on some projects before, if there's like a differentiation, because we have like a local government and a central government. So any central government body needs to follow that. When the local government has, I believe, more flexibility, they can use that as a guidance, but it's not enforced on them. But again, in general, anyone can access it and can use that as a, like, best practices for building apps, creating portals, websites, and so on. Just like a universal resource as well.
Great summary, Anna. That pretty much hits the nail on the head. Yeah, central gov have to follow this. Local gov, they would like them to follow it, but there's nothing mandatory, and anyone else can choose to follow some or all of it if they wanted to.
Yeah, the problem is with the local gov that they usually have a much smaller budget for delivering a project, and when the more user-centered design, the projects themselves are more expensive. So that's where the kind of key problem usually lies from my experience. Sorry for chipping in.
No, that's fine. It's all valuable stuff.
Any more questions for Stuart? Okay, I'll take it as a no. Stuart, thank you so much. It was absolutely amazing, especially the way you presented it. Very interactive and very cool.
I just wish we had the music at the start of each slide. We had the songs playing out when I did this on Spug a few weeks ago.
Kat sang for us. You two as a medium ground. Okay, I don't want to take any more time from Taylor's next half an hour of presentations. So Taylor, over to you. The floor is yours.
All right, wonderful. So today I'm going to be talking to you about Power Apps and accessibility, which are two areas that I'm really passionate about, and I've never had a chance to discuss them at the same time in this session. So that's very exciting for me today. So my name is Taylor Dorward, and I'm a white male with short brown hair, blue eyes, and a short brown beard. Today I'm wearing a blue shirt with a blue plaid shirt over top of it. And I do have a visual impairment. I'm not sure if I told that to any of our hosts today, but I do have visual impairment. So I am excited to be sharing my knowledge with you, but also if any of the hosts would be able to monitor the chat for me, I would greatly appreciate it and be able to relay questions. If so, I would greatly appreciate that.
We got you.
We'll do that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. All right, and so I am a CPACC, which is a Certified Professional in Accessibility Core Competencies. And for the past 3 or 4 years, I've been independent in Power Apps doing development and training, which I've really enjoyed. But I've realized accessibility is my true passion, so I'm kind of going all in on that. But I am also going to be talking to you about Power Apps today as well. So if you're more interested in that side of things, don't worry, I'll have a little bit of both. All right, so just a few interests of mine. I'm not going to spend too much on this slide because I'm sure you'd rather hear educational content than more about me. But some of my interests I have up here, like baseball, ballroom dancing, jiu-jitsu, singing, and some other things. So if any of these interest you and you want to learn more, then my QR code for my LinkedIn page is down there, and I would love to connect with you. So I know this is an accessibility-centric user group, but I still want to go over real quickly what accessibility is and why it's important. Because even if there's one person in this call that doesn't know what accessibility is, I don't want them left behind. So the definition I like to use is that accessibility refers to the design and provision of products, services, environments, and information that can be easily used, accessed, and understood by everyone, especially those with disabilities. So some of you may see I highlighted the word everyone, and I like to do that because there is a misconception that accessibility is only for those with disabilities and only they benefit. But that's not true. Accessibility can help everyone. There's something called the curb cut effect, and these I'm sure we've all used outside like grocery stores, that little ramp that goes from the curb to the parking lot. That is a curb cut, and it was initially developed to assist people in wheelchairs to access businesses. However, people without disabilities use it almost just as much, if not more, when they're pushing a shopping cart or a parent pushing a stroller. So that's just one example in the physical environment, how accessibility can help others, but this also applies to the digital environment. And so I'm going to be covering some accessibility things inside PowerApps, some things PowerApps helps you do to make them more accessible, and then some cool tips on things you can do customized accessibility solutions in your app. But also up here, I have a few reasons why we should care about accessibility. And I run into this issue a lot when I do public speaking on it. People say, oh, that's great, but I'm not really sure why we need to be doing this. And so I threw on a couple of big reasons up here. So first is using an ethical perspective and just knowing that it's the right thing to do to make people feel included. But then also you can have legal reasons to be accessible. If you have a lack of accessibility, you're leaving yourself open to massive legal risk because there's many different laws and standards on accessibility. Like here in the US, where I am, you have the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act, but also in the EU, you have the European Accessibility Act, which is going into effect in June of this year. So I know a lot of companies are kind of getting their ducks in a row because of that. But then other companies like Japan, Australia, parts of Canada, there are regulations all over the world. So if you're not making your products and services accessible, you're leaving yourself open to legal risk. And the last reason I have up here is a financial reason. So here in the US alone, people with disabilities have around $500 billion worth of disposable income. And that is a massive client base your company could be missing out on by not prioritizing accessibility. And again, that's just here in the US, so the number could easily be in the trillions if you calculate worldwide. So with that, I'm going to move over to PowerApps. So hopefully I don't have any technical issues while navigating back and forth between my presentation and PowerApps. So just give me one moment here. So this is an app I developed to help me with trainings for PowerApps. So on the screen, I have 10 lessons, but one of the lessons I do is accessibility, and that's lesson 7 right here. So right here on the left-hand side, I have some properties inside PowerApps that pertain to accessibility. And for anyone who's not familiar with Canvas apps, properties are essentially descriptive properties of any given element. So if I go into edit mode here and I click on this label, all right, and so over here on the right-hand side are I have the wrong one open there. All right, here we go. Now, when you open PowerApps, it shows a properties pane over here. So things like the font size, font weight, and other things that describe this element are properties. So these 4 over here are properties that enhance accessibility in your application. And so PowerApps can make it very easy for you to enhance accessibility by using the app checker. So when you open the app checker, there's this section down here called accessibility. And I know what some of you may be thinking. You see that large number next to accessibility and wonder, Taylor, I thought you prioritize accessibility. Why do you have so many? And that is a good question, but the reason for that is very simple. This app was designed for only me to interact with. So I made sure the UX of this app was accessible to me because I was the only user. If I'm making an app for others to use and I don't know their situation, I'm going to make sure this number is a 0. But I made the user interface accessible to other users, but I'm not as worried about these accessibility errors because they don't necessarily apply to me. So I'm going to collapse these real quick just to make it a little easier to digest. So it breaks it down into categories right here. So this first one says missing accessible labels and gives a number of how many elements inside your app are missing this accessibility feature. And so you can expand, and then they'll give you a list of every element that is missing that. And I'll pick a random one. I'll pick this icon. And so it takes me to the screen and already selects the element, which makes it very helpful. But not only that, it automatically goes to the property that needs to be changed. So right here, I'm in the accessible label property. And right now, what it's wanting to do is give text that the screen reader can read to the user to let them know what this element is for. And so this element is a back button that will take them back to the main menu. So I'll say, return to main menu. And so just like that, oh, there we go. Did I not? Oh, I typed on the outside of the quotations. That's the important thing. You have to be inside the quotations. So return to menu, and then I'll close that off. And so now if a screen reader interacts with this, it will let the user know what this button will do once it's interacted with. And so I'm not going to save this app and leave and refresh it because it may take a while to reload and I don't want to waste any time. So you may have noticed that number didn't go down, but I promise you if you leave the app and refresh it, that number will go down. And so my recommendation to you on that is to try and tackle those as you're adding elements to the app, because if you go back at the end and try and do that, you may see that large number and think, all right, that's way too much work. I really don't feel like spending that much time on it. So the next one here is missing tab stops. So I'll expand that and I will show that on an element. I'll click on this icon. And then which one did it take me to? This one right here. All right, so and again, it takes you to the property that needs to be changed. And so you see there's a value in here, but it's not an accessible value. So the property is tab index and its value is -1. So this means someone using keyboard navigation would not be able to navigate to that button, which is an accessibility failure. Something on your screen needs to be able to be interacted with, but cannot be reached by a keyboard, then that is very inaccessible. So we can solve this by simply changing this from -1, making it invisible to the keyboard, to 0. No, not -1, 0. Forgot the backspace. We just change it to 0. So now this would fix that error, and it would give this element a random tab order decided by Power Apps. So you could give everything in your app that can be interacted with a default tab order value of 0. But sometimes it's not always going to operate in the correct way you want it to. So you can then do a custom tab order, but instead of doing 0, you could make this a 1. And then it would indicate to Power Apps, all right, this is the first element on the screen I want you to interact with. Now, obviously on this screen, this is not the first one you would want to interact with. You would usually want to move in a Z pattern through the screen. But for right now, it's fine, and I'll just move it back to 0. But that would, again, solve that error, but I'm not going to refresh that to show that number going down. But I will collapse, and now I'll show focus isn't showing. This is also important for people using keyboard navigation, so a person with a mobility disability who has to use their keyboard to navigate the screen. So for instance, if they navigate with the keyboard to this button and they're able to, that's good. But if there's no visual feedback letting them know they're on this button, that can be very difficult for the user. So what the focus does is it puts a focused border around the element that is currently being interacted with by the keyboard. So I will click on one of these, and I wouldn't care about a label having that, so I'll just click on one. And so it gives focus border thickness. So it gives a default border thickness, but the thickness is 0, so it's not going to be visible. So we could just simply take this 5 out and make the border thickness, 0, and make the border thickness 5. And again, making that simple change will now make this element show a focused border around it when the keyboard is having this element selected. So a lot of these things may seem not very important, but if you rely on that to interact with your browser and your app, that can be very important. And so then below that, you have tips, but I'm not going to go into this for a sake of time. But I'll go back into preview mode here, and I'll come up here to this. Or actually, want to quickly talk about these real quick. We talked about accessible labels, and we talked about tab index, but we didn't talk about tooltip or live. So I don't know if you will see the tooltip on your end, because I think when you share your screen, sometimes it won't show. Do you see a small message underneath my cursor?
No, it's not
Doesn't
showing.
show when you share.
Yeah, I figured it might not show, but I'm sure you probably experience this when you're using different websites. When you hover over an icon or a button or anything that has a tooltip, you will see a little white banner underneath it with a message, a very short message that tells you what that icon or button does. And so this one has a tooltip that says reset form. So I know if I click this, it's going to reset this form. But if it didn't have that, and this was my first time seeing this interface, I wouldn't be quite sure if this is to reset the data set, to reset the browser if they're not used to Power Apps. But having that tooltip can be very helpful. And that's something that, again, is not only going to be helping people with disabilities, but someone without a disability who just isn't sure what that button or icon will do. And then the last one is live. So live is a very interesting property inside Power Apps, and anyone who has experience in HTML and using ARIA attributes to your HTML tags, you may have heard of ARIA Live. And so I will click on this label and I will go to the live property right here. And so right now it's always going to be default to live.off. But so what the live property does is you apply it to elements that are going to be changing dynamically in your app. So changing on your own or on their own. So I feel like explaining this be easiest by giving a quick example. So if you develop a Canvas app that is linked to Microsoft Teams and it's a chat app, and you have a label that is displaying messages like message sent, message received, or failed to send, that is something that is happening on its own or changing dynamically. And so for a sighted user, they can see that that label is changing, but for a user who is blind, they can't visually see that that label is changing, so they need a way to hear it using their screen reader, and you do that by using the live property. So right now it's set to live.off, so that means if this label were to change dynamically, it would not announce it to the screen reader. And so you can change this by doing live dot, and you'll see the options you have here. You have live off, like I said, but then you have polite or assertive. If you do either one of these, it will then announce the changes to the person using a screen reader. It just depends on how it's going to notify the user. So if I have it as polite, that means the screen reader will wait, or the app will wait until the screen reader is done talking before it notifies the user, hey, that message sent, or it didn't send, or you received a new message. But if I have it set to assertive, that means that the app will interrupt the user to let them know of a change. So a good example, like I said, about the message sent, you'd probably set that to live polite because the user doesn't necessarily need to know the second it sends. It'd be fine to wait till the screen reader is done. But if it is something like a warning message, and this also applies to web development, if it's something like a warning message you want the user to know right away, then you would want that live attribute or a live property in Power App to be set to assertive. And so obviously this field right here is not going to be changing dynamically in my app. I'm just using it as an example for you because I don't have anything on the screen that will be changing on its own. Let me do a quick time check. I can do it pretty good on time. Got a few, 5 or so. All right, so I don't know, since Stuart's audio wasn't working, I'm not sure if mine will, so I'm going to play this for a few seconds and then I'll stop and you can let me know.
Welcome to the BC Picking app. This app.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sweet. So I'll go ahead and play it.
Was developed to assist visually impaired workers with the picking process in Business Central. You will encounter multiple audible descriptions throughout this application to help you more easily use the app. This functionality can be turned off in the admin center of this application. Please reach out to the developer of this app, Taylor Dorward, if you have any issues using this application or would like to make any adjustments.
All right, so this is a proof of concept I was working on for a customer who was thinking about developing a BC picking app for visually impaired users on the factory floor. So this would be a welcome message once the app is started. Right now it's being triggered by a button for demo purposes, but I would put all of this code into the onStart property. So this message would play automatically to users as they enter the app. And then over here is what the user interface would look like on their phone. It would just simply be, this is one example of the screens. This would be 2 buttons. And so I'll go ahead and click one.
Option 1 selected. Navigate to screen 2. Double tap to confirm.
All right, so these are buttons, but I clicked on this button and nothing happened except it gave an audible description to the user of what will happen if you double click. And so this is a good example of the universal design principle, tolerance for error. So if the user clicks on this button, hears that and realizes, oh, that isn't what I wanted to do, no harm done because it didn't take them there yet. But if they click on it and think, all right, that is what I want to do, then they can go ahead and double click. And how much time do I have left? I don't want to take too much time on this.
There's 6 minutes.
All right, so this is an example of how you can give your users the option to customize the UI. And before I get into it, just a quick note, you might want to police this to a certain extent because you don't want to give your users too much flexibility with this where they could break the experience and make the interface look very poor. So for example, the slider control is defaulting at 12. But if I slide it, you'll see it adjusts the font size. And so a user may say, all right, the 12 is a little hard to read, so they come into the admin center and make the text a little larger. But I set the max to 50 on this slider control. But if the max was 100, that would stretch way too far and would not show all of the text in this box. So whenever you're doing this kind of stuff, you need to make sure that you're making sure the user doesn't have the opportunity to break the app, even if it's by accident. So another thing you can do is changing the font in the app. So this one, anyone who knows accessibility can even not, can just look at this and be like, yeah, that's a little hard to read. But the user could come in here and change it to Arial. And that is much more accessible. And then down here is color contrast can be changed. Right now, this is yellow and white. It's around 2.5 to 1 ratio, which is not even the bare minimum requirement. But so maybe they like the white background, but they want to change the text, change text to black. Now that's much better. But some users, if that's the default, some users have photophobia. So if you have too much white space, it can be a strain on their eyes. So that's why a lot of people like using dark mode. And so in here, you can have the option to put the app into dark mode. And again, this is a very high contrast ratio, except now the text is a much brighter color. So those are just a few examples on how you can have more customizable accessibility solutions in your app. And if you have any questions on the coding for any of this, more so this down here takes a lot more coding to get this done. So if you have any questions on that, I would be happy to show you how that's done. But I will go ahead and go back to my presentation real quick. And then that's my contact info at the bottom, and then we can do some questions.
Thank you very much for that, Taylor. Are there any questions for Taylor?
That was awesome. I have to say,
it was awesome.
My little accessibility heart is so happy now. Question for you from the chat. After start of notification, does a screen reader assume where it left off, or does it stop?
Sorry, what was that first part?
After an assertive notification, does a screen reader resume where it left off, or does it stop?
So in my experience, it will usually resume where it was. So if you're interacting with a certain element and then the screen reader takes over, it's not going to reset you to the screen, like to the first in the tab order. It's going to keep you where you are. Like it won't navigate to that warning message and then come back. But there's probably some code that you can do to change that functionality. But again, I'm not, and that might be a better question for if you want to know more in a web format, but in terms of Power Apps, then no.
Yeah, because I think my understanding has been depends on the screen reader. Yeah. Where if you put it as assertive will just play over top of the screen reader and it ends up becoming jumbled.
Oh yeah, you certainly do not want that. So if that's the scenario with the screen reader that's being used, then that'd be something you could communicate to the developer, and they could say, all right, well, that live property should be assertive, but let's see if it works better on polite. And then if it's too important that polite doesn't work, then there are other ways that you can do that by using an audio message as opposed to using the live property. Like how I had the app playing audio, I could have it audibly play a warning message that way instead of using the live property. So there are workarounds if it isn't behaving in the correct way you want it to.
I do have one question for you about your presentation. How did you get the double click situation going? This is something new to me.
That is something I worked on for 5 hours. It was a lot of fun. I had a customer reach out to me, and they exclusively hire people with visual impairments, and they were telling me about this app at a session at the conference. And as soon as they told me, my mind was going crazy, like brainstorming, how can I do that? And so I started working around with it, and I was like, all right, you can do it. So you have to use like audio controls, you have to use timer controls, if functions, and variables. So it's a lot of code involved and a lot of troubleshooting. But if anyone's interested in that, I would love to show that off. I had a lot of fun doing that. So if that interests you, I'd love to show you.
100% interested in that.
Yeah. Okay, there is one more question from Franco in the chat. Do you see an issue with Canvas of using, it disappeared, is a pixel as the unit for font rather than REM.
Sorry, I missed that. What was that?
So the question was, do you see an issue with Canvas apps using pixel as the unit for font rather than REM? And I hope I read them properly.
I'm not sure if I totally understand the question. Are you talking about the default fonts?
The sizes. So like when you define the sizes for like increasing them, what unit did you use for that?
Oh, you're talking about the code that makes you able to adjust the size?
The size for the fonts, yes.
All right, well, yeah, if you're cool with that, I can show that pretty quickly. It's actually very simple, but it's something that's very cool. So I could show that off pretty quickly, as long as I don't have difficulty sharing my screen again. There we go. So you see the power up here?
Yep. Yes.
All right, so this text is controlled by the slider. So I believe the question was, how do you get that to happen? And so it's actually very simple. So if I come over here, I have the text property changing as well, just to show you the number changing. But the question is, how do you change the font? And it's actually fairly similar how you do this, but it's just in the wrong property. So there's a property size in PowerUps, and I wish they would just call it font size, because for so long I'm like, how do you change the font when I first got started? I was like, oh, it's not called font size, it's just called size. But it's very simple.
Be nice if it respected CSS naming conventions.
Yeah. But yeah, it's actually very simple. So right here at the name of the slider control, which is right here, and then dot value. It's that easy. It is very cool, but it's actually super easy to set up. So, and have fun, like playing around with that. It makes it a little fun. So what this is essentially doing is saying, all right, so whatever font or whatever the value of this slider is, we're going to mirror that in the font size of this text label. And so this is 50, so it equals 50, and I'm moving all the way down to 8. It says 8, and I have the default at 12.
Thank you so much again for that. I will just quickly reshare my screen